All right, so this is part two. We left off rather abruptly here. What I did want you to know is, I guess a better way to say it is I would like you to be able to label these if you saw a map like this again, where the westerlies are and where the trade winds are. I'd also like you to know that those give rise to these drift currents or surface currents. And I think if you follow the arrows around and where they're warm and where they're cold, that just kind of makes sense given the poles to the north and south and the equator um, in the middle. And if you look at the direction of these currents, that should make sense as well. So from that, looking at the arrows and where they're red and where they're blue, you should be able to see what effect that has on uh, populations or areas that are adjacent to the water. So coast of California getting this sort of cooling effect, and for the coast, East Coast getting this sort of warming effect from the Gulf Stream currents. All right, so that's just articulated here. These currents give a rather warming or cooling effect based on those prevailing currents. All right, so again, a reminder of something that we said before, that water covers about 71% of the Earth. The oceanic crust covers about 50%, though, while the other 50% is the continental crust, and that means that much of the continental crust is actually beneath the ocean water. So if you think of how we might draw those subduction zones, that continental crust, a lot of it is beneath the ocean water, just to point that out. All right, so waves governed by, the amount of time that wind is blowing over the same area of water, the speed at which that wind is moving, and the distance of water over which the wind is blowing in one direction. So all those give rise to waves. And I won't go too deep into waves. We kind of talk about this with earthquakes a little bit, but the general idea is the wavelength is, if the wavelength is, let's say, 10 feet from crest to crest, the wave can feel down beneath the ocean half of that, so about 5 feet. So the waves, as they're coming into land, start to break as they feel the ocean floor. And so this just shows patterns of waves interacting, whether they combine to form larger rogue waves or sometimes interfere with one another so that they become smaller waves. All right. This kind of shows what I was talking about in terms of the Earth, or the waves filling one half the distance of the wave depth. So that's an important number. Half the wave length felt deep. And that's why if you're at the ocean and a big wave is coming in, you want to dive over it. There's less energy. And if you dive deep enough, you're not going to feel much of it at all because the energy is more towards the surface. All right, I'll let you read about long-short currents on your own. I want to switch into weathering, erosion, and deposition, then moving into surface water. So next week, we'll be talking about flooding, in particular with surface water. We've talked a little bit about weathering, erosion, and deposition related to sedimentary rocks. So some of this is a rehash of that. There is a lab that we do with a large stream table. I'm trying to get video of that up in a separate PowerPoint. It's going to be a really large file if that happens. So I'm still working on that. And so we'll ask you some questions based on what happens in the stream table. We have smaller stream tables in the classroom, but this large stream table that we have in the basement of Smith Hall is used in the video, and it does a really good job. All right, so we already know what deposition is, and it's part of this ongoing cycle of material being weathered and transported and deposited. What we didn't talk about is, what that looks like in a stream. And so one of the terms here, and there are some terms that people often confuse. So sediment load is as the stream is moving, how much of the material is being transported. All right, so whether it's suspended in the water, whether it is sort of bouncing and rolling down, but the total amount that is moved. All right, so these probably seem like common sense, but some of the things that will help determine whether a stream is eroding or depositing material is the velocity of the stream, the geometry, whether it's sort of constricting or whether it opens up, whether it's got a bend or more straight, and the viscosity, kind of how much stuff is in the water and the density of the water to some extent. Right? Stream velocity, some of this also common sense, the slope of the stream, the discharge, which we'll calculate next week, how much water is in the stream and how much sediment or load is in the stream. And again, channel characteristics, whether it's a bending, meandering stream or a more straight path. Again, the stream table does a good job at helping us see this much quicker, as we can actually watch a stream evolve and change over time, as opposed to going out and looking at sections of a stream that are static. They're in one phase, but over a larger length of time, they would change and morph over time. All right, so here's the general sort of what we know is that as water is moving through a stream, there, in this case, it's a low slope. There tends to be some bends and meandering. Where the water is slowing down is where the sediment is depositing. And so the outside curve, just think about if you were driving a car or watching a race car go around a curve, going up on sort of the outside, remember your physics here, sort of car going straight, kind of wants to go in a straight line, and we have to fight it a little bit at the wheel to make it turn. And the same is true with this water. So it's cutting the outside bank. It's actually faster on the outside bank and slower on the inside bank. And so we have this deposition building up on the inside banks, right, the inside of the turn. On the outside of the turn, we have this undercutting that occurs. And here's a side angle of what you would see. So deposition on the inside bend and undercutting on the outside bend. Okay. Over time, this builds up point bars. Okay, so that's this deposited sediment, again, on the inside of the turns, and undercutting on the outside. And eventually, sometimes what can happen, because this water is going to continue to try to erode away as it moves in a straight line, is that this section gets separated. We call that an oxbow lake, and we have quite a few of those in this region because we are more of a coastal region in this area. It's not steep. And so this is something that we see a lot here. So these oxbow lakes can get kind of stagnant over time. They're great for amphibians, a lot of mosquitoes, but they become separated from the mainstream. All right, so here's a section in Alaska, but there's a place in Harford County where I've done some kayaking, very similar to this, where in a straight line from one side to the other is not really that far. If you were to do this in a kayak, you'd be going back and forth and back and forth because of this meandering stream that takes place in a very flat environment. Here you see the point bars on the inside of the turns. And less so, we're going to be able to see the high velocity outer part of the turn where it's undercut. So here's some different side profiles in different areas. A to A is more of A to A prime, more of a straight section. If we look at the cross section there, and we'll see that the velocity is kind of highest in the center, and you just kind of think about this as the water is moving down the channel. It is in contact with the side, so there's some friction there, right? So it's going to slow down wherever the water is in contact with the sides or the bottom of the stream. And so our fastest moving velocity is beneath the surface. And so what we'll do, we'll work on this lab for next week and see if we can do it digitally, is we go out into the field. So that was what our field trip was all about, going out into the field and measuring this. And when we do that, we don't want to measure all the way down. There's a certain way that we want to measure the water to get at the velocity. But I'll forego that discussion for now, just to look at the shapes here. So B to B prime, you can see that B is the outside of that turn and B prime is the inside. And so the water is moving fastest on the outside of the turn, and we would have deposition at the low velocity on the inside, which in this case is B prime. The opposite here at C, so C is the inside of the turn, C prime is the outside, and so basically reversal of what we saw above. Right. Again, a picture of that deposited material on the inside, and you can see that that sediment tends to be smaller. because the water is moving slower, and so that's going to drop out. Where the water is moving faster, the larger, more massive material can be carried, and so we tend to see larger material that has come to rest or has been deposited on the outside of the channel. Okay. Again, another aerial view of that fine deposited sediment, point bars on the inside of the turns. All right, so we kind of talked a little bit about as sediments move from the origin to their place of rest or final deposition, how that changes the shape, where they become more rounded and they become more uniform over time. And so this just kind of shows that cross-section of what would happen to this rock at high elevation as it moves through to lower elevation through these meandering turns closer to our region that we live in as water becomes deposited into the bay. Skip through all that. Okay, so these are the terms that I was alluding to before. Not a big fan of memorization here, but in this case, there's not much else we can do. These terms are often confused by people, so I will encourage you to spend some time making sure that you have these right. And in particular, it's these first two, I think, that are probably the biggest. Dissolved load, just think about material that can be dissolved in water like salt. We're pretty familiar with that. Suspended is pretty self-explanatory. It's material that is suspended, carried in the water. Bed load is what it sounds like. It's material that skips, bounces, and moves downstream. So just imagine a rock skipping along the bottom of a stream during a time of a lot of water. Okay, so what do we mean by a lot of water? That's where confidence and capacity comes in. So confidence, think how big, the maximum size of the particles a stream can support. Okay, so think of a stream during flooding. Its confidence increases, and it can now carry large boulders. Whereas if the confidence is lower during times of very little rainfall, for example, and not much water, then much smaller particles are going to move, and that same boulder will stay still, won't move. Capacity is how much the total amount of sediment a stream can transport. And again, that's going to change with rainfall and whether it's a period of flooding or not. So capacity, how much, confidence, how big, what's the maximum size, maximum mass of a particle that can be moved. Right, this is just a little picture of Niagara Falls. If you haven't been, it's a great place to go and visit. We've got the American side over here and the Canadian side, which is more sort of built up, I guess is the way to say it. And this just mentions the eroding power of that stream. And so we believe that 11 kilometers has been eroded upstream over the last 9,000 years. All right, so here we see the Mississippi River and what it's carrying. So bed load, that load that stays along the bottom, 30 million metric tons. Dissolved load, 120 million tons. Suspended load, 30 million tons. So that's a lot of sediment moving down the Mississippi River. That leads to navigation challenges where there's sediment built up that vessels can't navigate. They need to know where that material has been deposited, and it changes, right? It's going to change over time. All right, let's see what's important here. Tendency of particles. All right, I think we mentioned all of that stuff, so I'll pass along. These are just some graphics of that suspended load versus bed load, and this is just an infographic, I guess, of what saltation means. A sort of idea of particle sort of skipping as it moves downstream, not staying suspended, not rolling along the bottom, but sort of bouncing as the water carries it. All right, and delta then is the area where the water is slowing down. So I like to imagine that if you've ever been to the water park and you come down the slide and then you enter into the big pool, you slow down, and so that's where you don't keep going the speed that you do as you're coming down the water slide. The same thing is happening with these particles. As the stream empties up into a larger body of water, that material slows down and is deposited, and that's what we call a delta. Right. And here's sort of the evolution of the delta as more and more material is depositing. You can see that leads to a massive amount of sediment that's deposited. All right, I'm going to stop there and we'll pick up there in the third part.